Hi, I'm Rowena. The last time I heard my mother laugh, it was when my son asked her if he could eat. She didn't look at him when she said, "Ask your mother to pay more." I was standing behind the door. I didn't speak. Not then. But what do you do when your own mother treats your child like a bill to be settled? When your son sleeps with hunger and you sleep with questions? Why do the people who raised us believe they can still own us? And what happens when we finally say, "No more"? I didn't expect the call. In fact, I'd been avoiding any interaction that smelled like obligation. But that afternoon, as I sat in our tiny two-room apartment in Springfield, half of it dim from the busted kitchen light I hadn't gotten around to fixing, my phone lit up with her name. Mom. I stared at it. Tobias, curled beside me with his book, looked up. "Is that Grandma?" His voice was hopeful. I nodded and pressed answer before I could talk myself out of it. "Rowena," my mother's voice said, clipped as ever. "I heard about the contract." So she had heard. Word travels fast when you're surrounded by people who love a good fall from grace story. I cleared my throat. "Yeah, the agency cut most of the long-term home care hours. I've been applying elsewhere." A pause, then, "Well, you could come here, temporarily, just until you get back on your feet." "But of course." Her voice shifted an octave, that soft, judgmental sweetness she reserved for when she felt generous. "We all have to carry our own weight." There it was, that invisible invoice she always tucked behind every favor. My silence, my compliance, my gratitude, manufactured and precise. "I'll think about it," I said. "You know we have the room," she pressed. "Cressida's kids visit all the time. They practically grew up in this house." That wasn't exactly comforting. Still, Tobias needed somewhere safe. The temporary shelter options in town weren't kid-friendly, and hotels were draining what little I had left. Pride, in that moment, had to step aside. "Okay," I said. "We'll come by tomorrow. Just for a bit." "Pack light," she said. "We're not running a motel." I hung up and looked at Tobias. "We're going to stay at Grandma's for a little while." He nodded and went back to his book, unbothered. I, on the other hand, opened a notepad and began listing everything we'd bring: groceries, toiletries, extra bed sheets, and a big, bold note about his peanut allergy. I'd learned the hard way not to leave that to chance. The next morning, I loaded the car. Tobias chatted in the back seat, naming every passing car color. The closer we got, the quieter he got. As did I. Her house was the same. Picture perfect. The lawn was trimmed with military precision, roses blooming in coordinated colors. She had the American flag mounted just so, the porch swept, the welcome mat too clean to step on. She opened the door with that tight-lipped smile. "You made it." We stepped in. Tobias slipped off his shoes immediately, always polite. I carried in the bags and placed them near the hallway. I noticed the guest towels were already out, embroidered ones that said "for company," but not placed in our room. They were for someone else. Someone more important, apparently. She gave us a quick rundown. "Try not to use too many appliances at once. It runs up the electric. And if Tobias needs snacks, make sure he eats in the kitchen, not on the couch. I like to keep things tidy." I nodded. No point arguing. Not yet. Dinner that night was a small gathering. Cressida's kids were visiting too. She brought cupcakes and wine. The table was set formally. Placemats, real silverware, cloth napkins with little holders. Then I saw it. Tobias's setting. A plastic plate, a plastic fork. He looked at it, puzzled. I gave him a smile, thin but encouraging. Cressida's daughter, Lily, giggled. "Mom says we save the good plates for real family dinners." I kept my mouth shut, my fists clenched under the table. Tobias didn't complain. He barely ate half his food. I noticed. I always noticed. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Tobias and I settled into the room. He snuggled into the old quilt I used as a kid, the one with the fraying seams. I read to him for a while, then turned off the lamp. A moment later, in the quiet, I heard his voice. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby?" "Am I supposed to feel hungry here?" The words hit like a sucker punch. "What do you mean?" I asked softly. He shrugged. I said I was hungry before dinner, but Grandma gave me crackers. That's all. I pulled him close. You should have told me. I didn't want to bother anyone. That did it. My throat closed. I kissed his forehead and said nothing, because what could I say? He fell asleep in my arms. I listened to his stomach rumble quietly in the silence, the sound I'd never forget. Outside the door, footsteps. Vera passed by, paused. She didn't say goodnight. She never did. I stared at the ceiling, my jaw clenched. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever, not after what I heard the next day. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the lace curtains in the guest room, painting delicate shadows across Tobias's sleeping face. I let him rest a little longer before slipping into the kitchen. I thought maybe, just maybe, a peaceful morning would reset the mood. Vera stood at the counter, stirring her coffee like it had offended her. Without turning, she said, "Your sister used to juggle 2 jobs when she was expecting. Never once asked us for help." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I'd learned that silence saved energy. Still, I couldn't help but feel the jab land just beneath my ribs. She added, "Dinner will be a bit formal tonight. Cressida and the kids are coming. Maybe keep Tobias away from the piano this time. He left fingerprints last visit." That smile, the one I used to believe meant warmth, flickered across her face, but it never made it to her eyes. Later, I set out Tobias's clothes while he brushed his teeth. "Grandma wants things neat tonight, buddy. Just try to stay close to me, okay?" He nodded without looking up. "Do I have to sit with the little kids?" "You can sit with me," I said, voice tight. By the time the doorbell rang, the table was already set like something out of a magazine spread. White porcelain dishes with gold trim, perfectly folded napkins, and glassware that hadn't seen daylight in years. Except for one setting. A single plastic plate, bright blue with cartoon dolphins, sat at the end, with a matching plastic fork. Tobias stepped into the dining room, saw it, and stopped. "Is this my plate?" I didn't answer, not out loud. I turned to Vera, who stood across the room pouring iced tea, and met her gaze. She smiled, tightly. "Kids don't always know what's good for them. Easier this way." Cressida's children waltzed in, polished and polished. One of them said, "Grandma made our favorite again," and Vera practically beamed. Dinner passed in awkward snippets. I nudged Tobias to eat, but he picked at his food. The porcelain clinked loudly around us, our plastic setting the only thing that didn't make a sound. After dessert, I excused myself and slipped into the guest bathroom. The mirror stared back, its fluorescent light unkind. I didn't want porcelain. I wanted respect. I remembered another dinner, years ago. I was 10. Cressida had received a tiny silver spoon just for dessert. I'd gotten a napkin and a reminder not to make a mess. You don't really understand something unless it happens to your child. I splashed water on my face and returned just as the guests were saying goodbye. Vera kissed Cressida's cheek and said loud enough for the hallway to hear, "Your kids are so well-mannered, such little angels. You really raised them right." Tobias hovered just out of sight, near the doorway. He didn't step in. He didn't need to. Then came the final blow of the night. "You know," Vera said, smoothing down the tablecloth, "you should take notes from your sister. She never made excuses." I turned to her, calmly but clearly. "I don't make excuses. I make choices." She blinked, startled, like the heat she was used to burning others had finally warmed her direction. That night, Tobias curled into my side as I read to him. He was quiet, too quiet. "Why do they like them more?" he asked. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "Because they think being loud makes you right. But quiet doesn't mean wrong." He fell asleep somewhere mid-page. I didn't move. My hand gripped the book as if loosening it would unravel something deeper. Later, as the house settled into its usual icy quiet, I crept into the kitchen to put our dishes away. The dishwasher hummed softly. Inside, each porcelain plate sat perfectly stacked, gleaming. But near the sink, untouched and alone, lay Tobias's blue dolphin plate. Still dirty. That was the night I stopped pretending we were just guests. The morning started like most others in that house. quiet, except for the sound of Vera humming something vaguely classical from the kitchen. Tobias sat on the floor in the living room, knees drawn up, sketching on a piece of paper with half-broken crayons he'd found in a drawer. He wasn't humming like he usually did. Wasn't even speaking. I leaned against the doorway and watched him for a moment. His brow furrowed as he focused on shading the edges of a tree. Not a joyful tree. It looked more like the kind that survived lightning, gnarled but still standing. Vera's voice floated down the hall. Eggs or pancakes? Oh, I'm just making for myself. She didn't ask if Tobias or I had eaten. Not that I expected her to, but the omission still stung. I grabbed my notebook and tried to focus on some online job applications, but the tension in my chest was like a rubber band pulled tight. I couldn't shake the feeling something was off, more than usual. Around mid-morning, I went to drop a towel into the laundry basket in the hallway. That's when I heard it. Tobias's voice, soft, uncertain, asking, "Grandma, can I eat today?" I froze. Vera's reply came with a chuckle so casual it didn't fit the weight of her words. "Ask your mother to pay more." I didn't move. Couldn't. My body locked into place behind the hallway door. I heard nothing else. No apology, no correction. Just the slow, fading sound of Vera's footsteps down the hall. It was like someone dropped a rock through a pane of glass that had already been cracked too many times. I waited there a full minute before moving, not because I was uncertain, but because if I moved, I'd say something I couldn't take back. And right then, I didn't want to give her that kind of satisfaction. Instead, I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the toilet lid down, staring at the shower curtain. If I stormed out now, they'd say I'm being dramatic, I thought. If I say nothing, I'll never forgive myself. It was the same trap I'd been in all my life with her. Speak up and be labeled ungrateful, or stay silent and be dismissed entirely. But something in me started to turn, not in a fiery way, more like slow erosion giving way to a cliff collapse. That afternoon, I started documenting what Tobias ate, what went missing from the fridge, what I overheard in passing. I used the Notes app on my phone at first, then later switched to a notebook. In the evenings, I pretended to fall asleep with my phone in hand, voice recorder app quietly capturing whatever floated in through the air vents and open doors. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet. I just knew I couldn't rely on memory alone. Not when people like Vera turned stories into weapons, then acted shocked when you brought receipts. That evening at dinner, she handed Tobias a half slice of buttered bread, no plate. "Here," she said in that performative tone she used for neighbors and church folk. "Don't say I never feed you." Tobias took it without a word. Didn't meet my eyes. He sat at the corner of the table, posture small, like he was shrinking on purpose. I looked at him, then at her. She was already pouring herself tea. This house will never be his, I thought, because it never really was mine either. Dinner ended with no conversation. I cleared our things, washed what little we used, and tucked Tobias into bed early. As I stepped out to grab his blanket from the laundry room, I passed by the kitchen again. Vera was on the phone, loud and animated. "I've opened my home," she said, "and still, it's never enough. Some people just don't know how to be grateful." I paused just out of sight. My fingers hovered over the screen. Then I opened the recorder. That was the moment I decided, if silence was their weapon, I'd learn to make it mine too. The dinner invitation came with that practiced tone my mother reserved for moments when she wanted control to feel like kindness. "Just bring yourselves," she said over the phone. "No need to cook anything this time. It's a special dinner. Just for family. Just for family." That line sat with me for hours after I hung up, sour and slow, like something curdled. Tobias was sitting on the floor again, drawing with those same broken crayons. I didn't tell him yet about the dinner. I wasn't sure if I wanted him to go. Later, when I overheard Vera chatting with Cressida in the kitchen about the surprises for the kids, I felt the crack widen. "Each one will get their own handmade card," she said proudly. "There are shining stars." It didn't take a genius to know Tobias wouldn't be among the each. The evening arrived dressed in its best illusion. Vera wore a blouse I hadn't seen in years, and she lit candles she used to save for holidays. Cressida and her kids walked in like they belonged on a catalog cover, Neat, brushed, their laughter perfectly timed. Tobias stepped in behind me, hesitant. I straightened his collar and gave him a little squeeze on the shoulder. Dinner began with toasts and small speeches. Vera passed out her handmade cards, each one embossed, with stickers and glitter, and a photo of each grandchild taped inside. When she reached the end of the stack, she turned to Tobias and offered him a folded napkin. A napkin. His eyes flicked between her face and the rest of the table. "He's sweet," Vera said lightly, almost musically, "but doesn't quite look like any of us, does he?" The room froze. You could hear the shift in breath. Even Cressida paused with her wineglass halfway to her lips. I stared at my mother, waiting for her to correct herself, to laugh awkwardly and backpedal. She didn't. She smiled, calm and cold. Tobias folded the napkin neatly, placed it beside his plate, and looked down at his food. He didn't touch it after that. I chewed slowly, not tasting a single bite. Every movement around me felt distant, choreographed for a play I wasn't part of. After the last dish was cleared, I headed to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I saw it, the list on the fridge, a crisp printout, magneted in place. Grandchildren Educational Trust Fund, for their future. 3 names were listed, each belonging to one of Cressida's children. No Tobias, not even a placeholder. No asterisk, no blank line waiting to be filled. I stared at it for a full minute. The light in the refrigerator buzzed slightly behind the door, casting a glow on the paper. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the need. My body simply understood what my brain hadn't wanted to accept before. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo, and emailed it to myself. Subject line, "Proof comes in plain sight." Then I opened my notes app and typed, "Friday night dinner, grandkids fund, exclusion visible." I left the fridge door open a little longer than necessary, just so I could let the cold bite a little. An hour later, while the dishes soaked in the sink and the house started its nightly quiet, I ran into Cressida in the hallway. She was checking her phone, scrolling through pictures of the dinner. She glanced up at me. "Do you ever wonder why Mom is like that?" I met her gaze, flat. "No. I know why. She likes mirrors that flatter." Cressida blinked, lips parted. Her brows knit just slightly. "What does that mean?" I stepped forward, voice calm. "You should ask her why Tobias isn't on that list." She blinked again. "What list?" I didn't answer. I walked past her. I didn't need to explain anything anymore. Not when the evidence was posted like decor in the middle of her kitchen. That night, I tucked Tobias in. He didn't ask for a story. He didn't even want a hug. He just said, "Can I take this with me?" He held up the napkin. I nodded. "Of course." He folded it again, perfectly into quarters, and slid it under his pillow. I walked into the hallway and stopped cold. A small sticky note had been taped to our bedroom door. "Please tell Tobias not to touch the fridge. It's confusing him." I stared at it, not even angry, just stunned at the simplicity of cruelty. That note told me everything. They weren't just forgetting him. They wanted me to agree he didn't belong. I found the note taped to the refrigerator just after Tobias had gone to brush his teeth. It was folded in half, neat as always, Vera's handwriting looping in blue ink across the front. "For your records." Inside, the breakdown read more like an invoice than anything else. Pizza, $18.99. Juice, $2.75. Tobias, 1 slice, 1 juice, $3.95. Reimbursed by Friday. There wasn't a thank you, no suggestion it was optional, just a quiet declaration of terms. I stood there, holding it, a strange mix of disbelief and familiarity rising in my chest like acid. I'd lived this pattern for so long, I could predict the next move before she made it. Still, it always found new ways to hit. I laid the paper on the counter. Tobias came into the kitchen, hair still damp, tugging at the hem of his t-shirt. His eyes caught the note. "What's that?" he asked. "Nothing important," I lied, but he was already reading it. His brow furrowed. "Was my food too expensive?" I smiled, tight, not convincing. "No, baby, your food isn't the issue." He nodded slowly but didn't push. That's the thing about Tobias, he's always known when not to. Later that morning, I found Vera wiping down the sink like it had insulted her. I held up the note. Is this how you measure family now? She didn't look at me, just continued scrubbing. Cressida always brought groceries. She understood what it takes to run a household. I waited. I'm not Cressida, I said. And I'm not ashamed of that anymore. She paused, just for a second, then dropped the sponge into the sink and walked away without another word. But something shifted then. Not just in the air between us, but in me. My voice, for so long stuck behind my teeth, had started to sharpen. That night, I started planning. On my phone, I opened a new note and titled it, Exit Prep, Not Just Physical. Underneath, I listed, Budget Projection, Childcare Contacts, Screenshot Folder, Meal Note, Fridge List, Door Audio, Timeline, When to Leave, How to Go Quietly, Emotional Checklist, What to Say, and more importantly, What Not to. When you grow up where guilt is currency, your first act of saving is silence. The next, peace. Dinner came around again with its usual layers of performance. The table was set, the good dishes out, and the chairs arranged by unspoken rank. Tobias sat at the smaller side table until he didn't. Halfway through, he picked up his plate, marched over to Cressida's son, and sat beside him. The room held its breath. Vera, barely containing her irritation, hissed, That seat's not for him. Tobias looked up, calm as stone. But you said we're all family. Even Cressida looked like she wanted to disappear into her wine glass. I didn't interfere. I watched. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled. The following afternoon, I met Minerva at the park. She used to sit next to me during choir practice back when I was still pretending that faith and family had anything to do with each other. We hadn't spoken much since Tobias was born. We sat on a bench near the duck pond. I told her one thing. They billed my son for his slice of pizza. Minerva blinked. They what? I nodded. Wrote it out. Itemized. Gave me a due date. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, that's not parenting. That's PR. She wants to look like the savior while charging for it behind closed doors. I laughed, surprised by the truth in it. She leaned in. You deserve better than her version of motherhood. And that boy, he deserves a place where he doesn't feel like a receipt. We sat there a while longer. The breeze picked up. Tobias chased a pigeon across the grass. I watched him, small and brave, and knew I was almost ready. That night, after I'd tucked him in, I returned to my room and found something new. A sealed envelope, placed neatly at the foot of the bed. Vera's handwriting again. On the front, 3 words. Fairness isn't free. I picked it up, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the envelope without opening it. I'd thought it was about money. I was wrong. It was about control. When Vera mentioned the backyard barbecue, her tone was laced with that too sweet inflection she used when she wanted to sound generous but remain superior. Just close family, she said over her shoulder while folding linens. But of course, you and Tobias are welcome, if he can handle being around more active kids. I didn't reply. Not immediately. I let the silence stretch, thick enough for her to notice, but not thick enough for her to question. I had learned to keep my tone neutral. What she really feared was calm resistance. He wasn't invited, I thought. He was tolerated. The days passed quietly until Saturday rolled around. The smell of burgers on the grill drifted through the open kitchen window. Cressida's children ran barefoot on the lawn, while Vera floated from guest to guest like she was hosting a garden party in the Hamptons instead of a mid-sized suburban backyard in Missouri. Tobias and I stood by the doorway. He held a small paper plate with a sandwich I had made him from our groceries. Vera hadn't offered him anything. She waved a spatula at me. It's just, he gets overwhelmed with loud noises, she said. Thought it might be easier if he stayed inside. Not once did she speak to him directly. I watched from the kitchen window as he sat alone on a wicker bench, quietly eating his sandwich while the other children laughed around the cornhole boards and drank soda straight from the cooler. Vera passed out burgers to each of Cressida's kids. I love their energy, she said, smiling wide. They just light up a room. She didn't look my way. She didn't have to. I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo through the glass. Tobias, his legs dangling, sandwich untouched in his lap, eyes following the others from a distance. I didn't feel anger anymore, not the hot kind. This was colder, denser. That evening, back inside, Tobias and I were folding towels in the laundry room when he asked, "Why did Grandma say I make things feel slower?" I stopped mid-fold. "She said that?" He nodded. "One of the other kids told me. They heard her say it." I crouched beside him. "Do you know what that means?" He shook his head. "It means they don't understand softness," I said. "And that's not your fault." He pressed his forehead to my shoulder. I held him longer than usual, longer than he usually allowed. He didn't let go right away. If they didn't want my child in their picture, I thought, they shouldn't have asked me to frame it. Later that night, while Vera was asleep, I went into my files and pulled up a scan of the $2,000 check I had sent her the previous year, the one she called a contribution to household upkeep when she needed to replace the fence and asked me, as family. I printed a copy, highlighted the amount in yellow, and attached a sticky note. "This bought more than a roof. It bought your silence back then." I placed it under the crystal tray where she kept her perfume bottles, the ones she only wore to church and fundraisers. She would find it, and she would never speak of it. The next day at dinner, Vera said nothing about the check, not one word. But as she cleared the plates, she handed Tobias a second slice of cake. "No one's touched it," she said. "Might as well." He took it carefully, looked to me. I nodded. No words. Just an offering. But the damage had already settled. Not freshly inflicted, but calcified. Like something ignored for so long it had become part of the foundation. If peace requires silence, I thought, I'd rather be loud alone. That night, after the dishes were done and Tobias was asleep, I opened my email to check on job applications. An unread message blinked back at me. From Minerva. Subject, Church Bulletin. "I've been thinking about what you said. Let's talk." And this time, I'll listen fully. I didn't know yet, but I'd just found my first real ally. I got home from work earlier than usual that day. The house was unusually still, save for the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the foyer, its chime muted years ago after Vera said it gave her headaches. Tobias was in the den, sprawled on the carpet with his coloring book, humming softly to himself, unaware of what I was about to see. The hallway smelled like lemon polish and staged comfort. And there it was, freshly mounted, a large canvas print titled Family BBQ, Summer Memories. Everyone was in it, everyone but us. Cressida and her children beamed in matching pastels. Vera stood in the middle, hands behind her back, her signature smirk frozen in gloss. The patio in the background looked warm and full. You could even see Vera's prized rosebush near the frame's edge, vibrant as always. Tobias and I weren't even in the background. Not a blur, not a shadow, not even the edge of a sneaker. Omission isn't forgetfulness, I whispered under my breath. It's erasure by choice. I was still standing there when Tobias appeared beside me. He looked up at the photo, then at me. "Did we not go to that one?" he asked, voice too innocent for what I knew was coming. "We were out that day," I said. He nodded and walked back to the den, unaware that his absence had been not just captured, but curated. Later that week, Vera was bustling in the kitchen with her signature holiday energy. It wasn't a holiday, but the church was having its quarterly potluck, and she had volunteered to collect birthday cards from the grandkids for one of the pastors. "Rowena," she called from the dining room, "make sure Tobias fills one out, something cheerful, but tell him, maybe just sign it with love, no name. I don't want to confuse anyone." I was mixing pancake batter, wooden spoon mid-stir, when her words landed. "What?" I asked, not because I hadn't heard, but because I wanted her to say it again. Vera turned, voice crisp. "It's just easier." People don't always know where he fits. The spoon slipped from my hand and clattered into the bowl, batter splashing up the sides. Tobias had already been sitting at the table, head bowed over the bright yellow card he'd decorated with balloons and stars. He had just signed his name. Without saying a word, he ripped the corner off the card, where the name sat, and folded it neatly. I didn't move. Couldn't. I watched him place the now anonymous card among the pile Vera had been collecting from the other grandchildren. "You didn't ask him to change the card," I said to her later, voice sharp but steady. "You asked him to erase himself." She didn't flinch. People won't ask questions if you give them nothing to question. Cressida walked in then, holding a coffee mug, clearly having heard enough of the exchange to know what it was about. "Are you okay with this too?" I asked her directly. She paused. "Maybe it's just easier this way." "For whom?" She didn't answer. That night, while the rest of the house pretended nothing had happened, Tobias sat in his bed, sketchpad balanced on his knees. I watched from the doorway as he drew another card, this one simpler, quieter. He wrote 3 words at the bottom. "Love, T." He held it out to me, smiling with that half-proud, half-hoping expression I'd come to recognize. I folded it and slipped it into my purse, right behind the photo of us at the zoo, the one where his smile stretched across his whole face, back when he still believed love didn't need permission. They can take his name out of their house, I thought, but not out of his story. After he fell asleep, I cleaned up the art supplies and walked back to my room. Looking for a place to stash the sketchpad, I opened an old shoebox at the bottom of my closet. That's when I saw it. A faded photo of a birthday party from 1990, Cressida's party, judging by the banner. All the neighborhood kids were in it, paper hats slightly askew. Vera stood in the middle, smiling, her hand resting on Cressida's shoulder. I was there too, off to the side, barely in frame, mouth open mid-laugh, one arm raised like I was trying to get someone's attention. I flipped the photo over. In Vera's handwriting, "Cressida's birthday, 1990. No mention of me. The pattern wasn't new. I just hadn't wanted to see it before. The envelope was waiting for me on the kitchen counter when I got back from picking Tobias up from school. Vera didn't leave a note. She never did. That would imply accountability. Inside was a printed spreadsheet, columns, rows, amounts, all tidy. At first glance, it looked like some kind of house ledger. At the bottom of each section, a label, "Shared household expenses." One line stood out, "Back to school shopping, $218.47, Cressida's kids." Another, "Pool repairs, summer prep for grandkids." At the very bottom, in that same neat handwriting I'd memorized since childhood, "Balance owed, consider this your portion." I exhaled slowly. Not surprised, just insulted. I folded the paper and placed it back inside the envelope, slid it into my bag beside Tobias's latest zoo drawing. After dinner, while Vera cleaned the stovetop with her signature passive aggression and Tobias settled into his coloring books, I told him I was stepping out for a walk. I walked 3 blocks to Minerva's house, her front yard still decorated with last season's sunflowers and a faded "welcome" sign. She met me at the door before I knocked. "I was hoping you'd come," she said. We sat in her backyard, side by side on a weathered bench that had probably hosted decades of private truths. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell her the emotional part. I stuck to the facts. I paid for their roof last year. She billed me for my son's slice of pizza, and now she's tracking my portion of her grandchildren's luxuries. Minerva listened with the stillness only someone deeply attuned could hold. "You always were the one no one heard," she said after a pause. "Even when you screamed inside." Then she pulled out her phone, tapped a few buttons, and turned the screen toward me. "Want this to change?" she asked. "Let's record it right." It was footage from her doorbell camera. A week prior, I had stopped by to drop off a casserole, leftover habit from better days. Vera had followed me to the porch. I had left, but Vera had stayed, speaking to someone else out of frame. Minerva played it aloud. "Rowena's just staying here out of guilt," Vera's voice said clearly. "That child isn't even part of this family. He's a sympathy project." The screen froze. Minerva didn't move. I didn't either. There it was, not coded, not careful, just Vera, raw and unfiltered, confirming everything I'd felt for years but had never captured in words. I went home and opened my laptop. I started with the subject line, "This is how they treat children outside the frame." Then I attached 3 files. A copy of the check I'd sent for house repairs, a photo of the grandkids' trust fund list, Tobias not included, the audio from Minerva's doorbell. I didn't send it. Not yet. But it was ready. And the mere act of assembling it made me feel something I hadn't in a long time. Power. The next day, Vera tried to play it normal, offered me tea, told me she had been meaning to get that lawn trimmed, and asked if I had any big plans for the weekend. I poured the tea, sat across from her, and placed an envelope on the table. Inside, the invoice she had left on my bed days ago, highlighted. She didn't touch it. "Why are you being like this?" she asked. I stirred my tea, calm. "I'm finally acting like your equal. That feels threatening, doesn't it?" She said nothing. That night, after Tobias had gone to bed, I sent the email. Not to the world, not yet, but to her. Just her. A moment later, I heard the ding of her phone from down the hall. Then silence. 10 minutes passed. Then I heard her bedroom door open. Her steps were lighter than usual, cautious. In the morning, she avoided my eyes. And when I checked my inbox, there was a reply. It wasn't an apology. Just a photo attachment. I opened it. It was a framed image of her, Cressida, and the grandkids. Again, same one from before. Still no Tobias. I responded with my own, a photo of Tobias and me at the zoo, his arm wrapped around my shoulder, eyes bright and unafraid. The caption I typed read, "We framed ourselves, because you never would." I hit send. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was panic dressed in pearls. The email went out just before midnight. One click, no dramatic music, no fireworks, just a quiet thud in my chest. Sent. By morning, the air in the house had changed. Vera didn't look at me during breakfast. She buttered her toast in slow, deliberate motions, like her hands were trying to find some normalcy to hold on to. I didn't press her. I didn't need to. Cressida sent a text around 9 a.m. "You've always had a flair for drama." I stared at the screen, let the words settle. Then I typed back. "They call it drama when you finally stop swallowing what they feed you." I didn't hit send. Some truths don't need to land in their inbox. They just need to stop living in mine. Later that afternoon, Tobias and I ran into Mrs. Landon at the grocery store. She was the type who knew everyone's business without ever being asked. Sweet voice, sharp edges. "Well, hello there," she said. "And who's this little guy?" Tobias smiled politely, then went to pick out a cereal box. "Mrs. Landon leaned in. "Is he your son? I thought Vera said you were helping raise someone else's boy. From church, maybe?" I blinked. "He's mine." Her eyes widened slightly. "Oh, she mentioned something about you taking in a child, like helping out." "He's mine," I said again, firmer. Tobias came back, holding his cereal. "Can I get this one?" I nodded. As we walked toward the checkout, he asked, "What did she mean, helping out with someone's child?" I knelt to his level. "Some people don't understand the shape of love," I said gently. "That doesn't mean we change ours to fit their box." He seemed to accept that. I wished I could. Back home, Vera was already simmering when we returned. The door barely shut behind us before she spat, "You brought this on yourself." "Brought what?" I asked, calm. "The whispers, the emails. You always did like to make a scene." "Tobias never called me Grandma," she added, arms crossed. "That says everything." "He didn't call you that," I replied, "because you told him not to." She flinched, just slightly. No denial. Cressida stood at the far end of the hall. She heard it. She didn't step in. She turned and walked away. That night, while Tobias was coloring in the living room, I sat in my room and pulled out a notebook. I titled the page, "Reasons We Stayed Too Long." Guilt. Hope they'd change. Because silence was familiar. Because leaving felt like betrayal. Because I thought I needed permission. I stared at it for a long time, then tore it out, crumpled it, and threw it away. No more explaining my decisions to ghosts that live in someone else's expectations. 2 days later, I met Minerva at a coffee shop. She'd already read the email. "I didn't embellish anything," she said. "I just let the receipts speak." I nodded. She leaned in. "A few women from the church board unfollowed Vera last night. She's no longer organizing the fall fundraiser." Small ripples, I thought. But even those shift tides. That same evening, Vera posted a photo of her garden with a caption so laced in sugar it could have rotted teeth. Family isn't always loyal, but we rise above. The comments were quiet, fewer than usual. After dinner, Tobias sat at the foot of my bed while I folded laundry. He was quiet, watching his socks disappear into neat little balls. Then he looked up. Do they still think I'm not family? I sat beside him. They don't get to decide that anymore. His shoulders relaxed. But deep inside, I knew I wasn't done. There was still one more truth I had to hand-deliver. It started with a phone call I didn't expect. Cressida's voice was sharp but fragile, like a glass about to crack. Mom hasn't been sleeping. What did you do? I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, watching Tobias play with sticks in the backyard like swords against imaginary enemies. I told the truth, I said. She's just not used to the echo it leaves behind. Cressida didn't reply right away. The silence stretched. I could almost hear her thinking. She's not herself lately, she finally said. No, Cressida, I corrected softly. She is herself. You're just seeing it in a mirror instead of through a frame. By the end of the week, the church had quietly pulled Vera from organizing the autumn fundraiser. The announcement came in the form of a group text, short and professional, no explanation. I knew exactly why. So did she. She tried to salvage face online. Her posts grew longer, more floral. One caption read, "Some people only bloom when they're being watered by pity." If that was aimed at me, I didn't care. Because truth had a different scent. It wasn't always sweet, but it always lingered. The following morning, Tobias found a pair of old sneakers by the front door. They had belonged to Cressida's oldest son, now off at boarding school. He slipped them on, his smile soft. They fit. Before I could respond, Vera stepped in from the hallway, voice cutting like wire. Take those off. They aren't for you. Tobias froze. His hands went to the laces, but didn't move. I stepped forward. He's not borrowing. He's surviving what you refuse to make space for. Her jaw twitched, but she said nothing, just turned and walked away. Later that night, Tobias climbed into bed slowly, pulling the covers up to his chin. I sat beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He whispered, "Does Grandma love me?" I opened my mouth to say yes. My tongue betrayed me. I paused, took a breath. She doesn't know how to love someone she didn't plan for, I said gently. But I do. I kissed his forehead, switched off the lamp. In the dark, I added silently, I didn't say she didn't. But I couldn't lie again. The next day, while Tobias was at school, I drove to the print shop downtown. I pulled up the photo of us from the zoo, the one I had kept hidden, protected from Vera's opinions. I printed it on canvas, larger than any frame in her hallway. At the bottom, I added the words, "Family isn't who you're born from, it's who shows up hungry and is still fed." Then I mailed copies to every aunt, cousin, and friend on Vera's Christmas card list. 2 days later, the ripple began. A cousin in Florida called me, apologized for never reaching out after Tobias was born, said she'd seen the post, the picture, that she remembered how I used to bring cupcakes to Sunday school for everyone, even when I was never asked. Minerva texted a screenshot from the church's Facebook page. The picture was there now too, pinned. Then came Sunday. At the end of service, while the room buzzed with post-sermon chatter, Tobias handed me something, a drawing. It was simple, a tree, tall and sprawling. Next to it, a stick figure, labeled with uneven letters. "This is me. I belong here too." He gave it to a teacher before we left. Later, I saw it on the bulletin board, right next to the weekly announcements. No one had touched it. No one had taken it down. That afternoon, Vera walked past it, her expression unreadable, tight-lipped. She didn't stop. We exited the side door, sunlight hitting our faces, crisp and unapologetic. As we reached the car, I noticed an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. No return address, just plain white paper, sealed. I opened it slowly. Inside, a single typed sentence. We framed the wrong daughter. But it's too late now, isn't it? I didn't know who sent it. But I knew exactly who it was meant for. The quiet in the house was no longer the kind that pressed against your temples or curled under your skin. It was hollow. An absence, not a presence. I passed the living room where Vera usually sat like a sentinel, remote in hand, perfume trailing behind her like smoke. Now the cushions stayed fluffed, the TV stayed off. Her absence filled the room louder than any of her words ever had. Cressida had packed up a few nights prior. "Just need space," she'd mumbled, stuffing her monogrammed tote with essentials, not meeting my eyes. I hadn't asked her to leave. But the weight of consequence has a way of making people flee before they're asked to explain themselves. Vera no longer asked if Tobias and I would be joining for dinner. No passive-aggressive reminders about dishes or grocery contributions. She passed by us like shadows, and for the first time in years, I realized something. Sometimes the absence of hostility feels like grace. That morning, while Tobias was at school, I entered the guest room, the one Vera had insisted was temporary. I began folding his clothes, stacking his books, quietly wrapping up this chapter without ceremony. When I pulled back the pillow from his bed, I found a small yellow sticky note. "This is not my home." It was written in Tobias's handwriting, neat, deliberate. He'd never said anything. I'd never asked. We both had known. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my wallet, right beside the photo of him from his last school art fair, standing proud beside a poster of Jupiter. That evening, after dinner passed in silence and Vera had retreated to her room, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. Not an angry one, not a monologue, just a simple truth. "Thank you for reminding me who I never needed to be. We're leaving in the morning." I left it folded on the table, beneath the salt shaker. I didn't need a dramatic exit. I only needed one that was mine. The next morning, I loaded our things into the car as Tobias ate a banana on the front step. Vera stood in the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. She didn't try to stop us. She didn't ask where we were going. I didn't hug her goodbye. I didn't offer closure. I just nodded once. Tobias didn't look back. The new place wasn't perfect. A small rental unit with scuffed baseboards and a door that stuck when it rained. But it was ours. Ours in the way that meant we could breathe without measuring the cost of each inhale. We painted one wall sky blue, Tobias's idea. He chose posters for his room, dinosaurs, solar systems, a cartoon cactus wearing sunglasses. As he looked around, hands on hips, he said, "This is my room." I smiled. "Yes, baby. Yours." A few days later, a package arrived, no return address. Inside was a frame, simple, wooden. Inside the frame was Tobias's drawing from the church bulletin board. The tree, the stick figure, the words, "This is me. I belong here too." Taped to the back was a note. "He belongs. We see him now. And we see you." I sat on the floor and cried, not out of pain, but something rarer, recognition, the kind that made you feel taller inside your skin. That night, as we curled into our separate beds in the quiet of our new home, Tobias whispered from across the room, "Mom?" "Yeah, honey? Will we ever go back there?" I turned to face him, and I said what no one ever told me when I needed it most. "You never have to." The last time I stepped foot in Vera's house, I wasn't carrying guilt, groceries, or hope, just an envelope. She opened the door slower than usual, her posture straighter but her eyes tired. She didn't offer a greeting. That was fine. I wasn't here for pleasantries. "I won't stay long," I said. She nodded once and stepped aside. I handed her the envelope. Inside was everything I needed her to have. Nothing more, nothing less. A notarized document releasing any claim I had to her will, her house, her legacy. A printed copy of the doorbell audio she still pretended didn't exist. And one folded letter that read, "You taught me control. I turned it into freedom." She opened the flap slowly. Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak. Maybe she wanted to. Maybe she didn't know how. I didn't wait to find out. I walked into the living room and placed a new photo on the mantel. Not one of her choosing, but mine. It was of me and Tobias, standing outside our new home. The sun was setting behind us, his hand in mine, our smiles real and unforced. I flipped the frame and pressed it firmly against the wood. On the back, "This is what family looks like, even when you're not in it." I stepped back. She stood in the hallway, watching. She didn't reach for the frame. She didn't remove it. She didn't have to. The next weekend, I spoke at a local women's luncheon at the library. The topic was simple but heavy. What we don't say. The cost of silence in family systems. Minerva sat near the front, her expression soft but proud. I recognized a few cousins in the back, ones I hadn't seen since before Tobias was born, ones who stopped returning my Christmas cards years ago. I didn't cry during the talk. I didn't raise my voice. I just told the story the way I lived it. Clean, undramatic, honest. The applause afterward was long, not because I broke down, but because I didn't. On Tuesday, Tobias came home from school with a grin and a gold sticker on his backpack. "I got picked," he said, dropping his folder on the table. "For what?" He pulled out a letter from his teacher. He'd been chosen to represent his grade in the school's Voices That Make a Difference campaign. His essay read, "My mom taught me that even quiet kids deserve to be heard, so I won't be quiet when it matters." I framed it that night and placed it on my desk, right beside the bills, the keys, and the checkbook. Not because it was poetic, but because it was proof. A few nights later, Vera left a voicemail, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I miss my family," she said. I didn't call back. I didn't need to. Instead, I recorded a voice memo, one I never planned to send. "Family is who doesn't make you beg to belong." Then I deleted it. Some things don't need to be said. Some answers don't need delivery. Closure doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just leaves the door open behind you, and you keep walking. On the first spring morning in our new home, Tobias opened the curtains without asking. The light poured in, soft and forgiving. "We don't have to hide here, do we?" he asked. I looked up from the kitchen counter and smiled. "No, baby. Here, we open the blinds." Because some stories don't end with forgiveness, they end with freedom.